Thank you, Saeed. That was a very compelling red team story and certainly highlights some of the reasons organizations really need to identify misconfigurations, vulnerabilities in the database that can lead to data exfiltration. I'm going to show you some of these specific capabilities that need to exist at any organization to really thwart data exfiltration. And so let's take a look at that. We're going to take a look at our App Detective Pro solution and what an organization needs to thwart data exfiltration is the ability to assess these database environments and identify these misconfigurations. You need a solution that can help you discover your target assets. Many organizations are not sure where all of their databases exist, or maybe they assume we're a SQL and Oracle shop, but we did a discovery and found some Sybase, some PostgreSQL, some MySQL. What do we do when we have these rogue environments, or what processes should we implement in order to stay ahead of these challenges and remediate them? Well, certainly discovering your targets and then giving you the ability to scan those targets with a specific policy. And so the technology that an organization uses should give you many options. CIS benchmark, SOX policy, PCI, GDPR, CCPA, FedRAMP, DISA-STIG. Maybe you're looking for best practices that are following NIST 853. You need a solution to give you a baseline to start to meet some of the regulatory requirements many organizations have to comply with. And so the tool that any organization brings in needs to be able to scan these on a reoccurring basis and really look at the output of this data. In some cases, we need to identify where we have sensitive data, um, but we can see when an assessment is run, and we could start to provide details like, okay, what are findings? Findings are configurations that we checked in the database, and the setting is not correct. Then we have other statuses like non-finding, the setting was set correctly. Fact and metadata, these are things that you should capture, not necessarily actionable, but certainly things that you should capture in case you need to do forensic analysis. Skipped in policies, these policies support multiple database platforms, even multiple versions of that database. And so when an assessment is run, we may have checks within our policy that are looking at vulnerabilities that existed in SQL 2016, but this is a 2019 instance. So we'll skip that check. And then you have things like failed. If you're missing privileges and access, you won't be able to get that data. And so a failure is checks we were not able to run because we didn't have ample privilege. Now, when we look at a finding, this is based on the CMMC regulation. And we could see the identification of multiple vulnerabilities. And each of these vulnerabilities are going to have a number of occurrences, such as critical DBMS files fault protection has 7 occurrences of this finding. And so we can see those specific details. And when you highlight a particular finding, you're able to see what's called is a knowledge base article. And so when I select a check over on the right here, you should have the ability to see why should I care about this check? What are the implications? What versions of the database are impacted by this? How do I fix this problem? And are there sites that I can visit to do further research? And is there a CVE or CCE reference number with this? And so we provide a knowledge base article for each of the checks that are provided within that particular policy. And so you can generate a report on the fly where you're identifying these misconfigurations. Now, there's different team members within every organization. So, do you need to identify just the high severity issues? You can provide a summary report, which is basically giving you those specific vulnerabilities and the knowledge base article details with that. So the summary report will is usually for management or the security operations team. The details are certainly what is needed when we are talking about looking at or giving this report to the DBAs. Here we see a report with a graphical representation of the breakdown of high, medium, and low severity issues. And then as I scroll down, this is the detailed report. And so here you see the listing of all of the actual occurrences, whether they're users, a particular database, registry entries, and not only does the detailed report provide, uh, the knowledge base articles and all of the occurrences, but it provides all of the necessary details, even how to fix these problems. So the only way to stay ahead and thwart data exfiltration is to implement a technology that can be scheduled to gather this data on a reoccurring basis. Not only vulnerability information, but even user entitlement data, where we can see who has access to my sensitive data, what kind of access do they have, who has these all powerful user roles in the environment, should they have them, and who exists in the environment across all of your database environments, whether they're on-prem or in the cloud. You need a tool to be able to continually assess that database for compliance to a regulation. But even within our tool, we give you the ability to modify policies and add other features to your scanning capabilities as a whole. Is it a good practice to also scan for easily guessed passwords? Yes. I think we continue to hear of issues at organizations or things like the most easily guessed passwords ever used, password 123 being at the top of that list. How do we test to make sure we're applying good policy across our environments and nobody is doing that, or even giving the ability to define a dictionary of words, passwords, if you will, that should not be used across the organization. So through the reoccurrence of these tests, not only can we generate those findings, what has occurred, but we can also give you a differences summary. So the next time you scan, we can identify what things have been remediated, what things still exist. Maybe this new report has found new vulnerabilities. The one constant in every organization is change. And so the only way to stay ahead of these misconfigurations, vulnerabilities in the database is to have a tool that'll allow you to do this in an automated fashion. Now, there are mandates and regulations where you can grab the scripts and do some of this yourself. And that's fine, but these things continually change. And you need the ability to have some extra features on top of that. What if we had the ability to generate a fix script? All of the things that we found in this assessment, would it be advantageous if we gave the DBA team a script for them to use in their development testing? They can cut and paste and develop that script much faster than if they were typing all of this by hand from the word go. And so generating that fixed script, providing knowledge base details. This is very important. I've seen many organizations enable logging, native logging in the database and forward that up to a SIM. Brilliant. That'll solve all our problems. The issue is when that data gets to the SIM, you have individuals who are not familiar with the database, who don't understand what this vulnerability is telling me. They understand that it's a high severity, but what exactly does this mean? And so, again, having additional context within a solution is going to help you build a program that can do this on a regular basis, identify these issues, and continue to remediate them as time goes on. We do have the ability to set up specific reporting if you're in the government around DIACAP or DAS vulnerability compliance. So if you're trying to comply with DISASTIG or FISMA or FedRAMP, we have built-in policies to do that as well. Now, as I was talking about benefits of just doing this with scripts inherently, we also have the ability to add things like control reviews. And so we might identify through a particular assessment a vulnerability. And so we can take that vulnerability and add notes to it. And so I may say, this is not a vulnerability because of X, Y, and Z. And so we can add notes to the assessment to add further details as to why this should be considered either a finding or not a finding for that matter. And you can generate reports on this information as well. And so the tools that you bring in need to automate this capability. And our own Spider Labs teams, when they have database assessments, they can also use this App Detector Pro tool to, instead of using scripts, we have an automated solution to do that. And there's a million of benefits wrapped around the technology that really make that the best way forward. Even the ability to customize our policies or even having those built-in policies. We need to go beyond compliance in many cases. And so how do I do that? Well, it starts by customizing your policy that you use. And maybe it was based on CIS or PCI, SOX, FISMA, you name it, whatever that baseline is. There are ways to enhance our capabilities and our features across that environment. We can add controls. We can add exceptions to a finding. If I want to look at users that have sysadmin role, there may be users listed in here that are that have been identified as a finding, but there are DBAs like Tony Z and Raul G. And so now that we've added these exceptions, the next time we scan, they'll be excluded from that and will not come up as findings. And we can also report on this information on what policy we have, what exceptions and exclusions exist there. We could even add controls. And so here we see that we've got multiple target platforms with multiple categories. And so if I'm looking at SQL Server under this category, these checks are not part of this policy. But that doesn't mean I can't add them and really make a gold standard. Compliance is fantastic, but in some cases, if we're looking at security, then we have to go beyond compliance and implement some best practices around really locking down the environment and thwarting data exfiltration. And as we heard earlier from our Spider Labs team member, we were able to see how they used an existing vulnerability in the database to enable that breach. And so this is an area where we maintain our most sensitive records, sensitive data. In the past, criminals robbed banks because that's where the money is. Today, data is what is so sought after. And that's because that's where the money is. And so if data is that target these days, then databases are really the gold mine that are containing this gold. And so it's necessary to implement best practices to really thwart data exfiltration. Julie, back over to you. Thank you.